The story we are going to tell today took place in Shijingshan District, Beijing, back in 1999. Specifically, the case happened in the early hours of May 30th, 1999. Let's start from the moment when the Beijing Public Security Bureau's 110 emergency hotline received a call at around 2:45 to 3 o'clock in the morning. After the call went through, a girl with a southern accent spoke in a very soft, timid voice, as if she dared not make a sound. Her tone was almost tearful as she asked, "Hello, is this 110? The operator replied, "Yes, please tell us what's wrong." The girl cried, "Hurry! Come save us! Someone is killing us here. Several of my roommates have already been killed, and he's coming for me next. Please hurry!" The 110 operator, a woman, urged, "Where are you? Tell us your location." The girl was presumably so nervous that she could barely speak Mandarin, and babbled in a Minnan accent. The operator said anxiously, "I can't understand you. Please repeat that in Mandarin." At that moment, a shrill scream came through the receiver, followed by a series of terrified cries. The operator also heard a distinct thud-thud-thud sound, one that chilled her to the bone. The noise was crystal clear, and it scared the female operator half to death. Then, the line went silent, leaving only indistinct murmurs. The operator immediately tried to trace the call's origin. Just as she was searching for the location, another call came in. This time, the caller was a young woman with a thick, authentic Beijing accent. She said, "Hello, is this 110? The same operator answered, "Yes, what's the matter?" The woman replied, "I think there's a murder happening in our neighborhood." The policeman on duty asked, "Where exactly?" She said, "Under Building 4, Unit 4 of Hongda Community in Shijingshan District, Beijing, right downstairs from my house. I just got off the night shift, and I saw a girl lying on the ground there, covered in blood. Please come quickly." With that, she hung up and waited for the police to arrive. By then, the 110 operator had confirmed that both calls came from the same location, Hongda Community in Shijingshan District. The Shijingshan Public Security Sub-Bureau had no idea how severe the case was, so they dispatched 2 police officers to check it out. It was the middle of the night, with no traffic jams, so the 2 officers arrived at the scene in no time. When they reached the spot, they saw a van parked under Unit 4 of Building 4 in Hongda Community, and a young girl lying dead beside it. From the state of her body, the officers could tell she was already deceased. Pools of blood had formed on the ground, indicating she had run out of the building before collapsing. The girl's injuries were horrific. A single, brutal stab wound to her back had pierced her lung, something the autopsy would later confirm, and her carotid artery had been slit, leaving her head barely attached to her body by a sliver of skin. She was only 19 years old, and even in death, she looked strikingly beautiful with fair skin, long black hair, and a high-bridged nose. Her eyes were wide open, as if she had died with unfinished business. She was wearing an apricot yellow blouse, now soaked crimson with blood, and white pants stained red from the waist down. She was barefoot. The 2 officers were shocked by the sight. Following the trail of blood leading into the building, they climbed to the 2nd floor and found the security door of apartment 202 wide open. The floor inside was also covered in blood, confirming the girl had fled from there. The officers turned on the lights and stepped inside, and what they saw made even these seasoned cops, with over 20 years of experience each, break out in a cold sweat. They had never witnessed such a gruesome scene. The 2-bedroom apartment was littered with bodies, all young girls. Some were fully clothed, others partially dressed, some only in their underwear. They lay scattered across the beds and the floor, motionless. Counting them, the officers found 7 bodies inside, plus the one outside, 8 in total. Horrified, they quickly retreated to avoid contaminating the crime scene. A case of this magnitude was far beyond the capacity of the Shijingshan Public Security Sub-Bureau. They immediately reported it to the Beijing Public Security Bureau, which sent a large team of forensic experts and criminal investigators to the scene. By the time they arrived, the area downstairs was already swarming with curious residents, who had gathered in layers to watch the commotion at 4 o'clock in the morning, no less. Why were so many people awake? Because the girls had not died silently. Their blood-curdling screams of terror had echoed through the night, waking everyone in the vicinity. It was the end of May, and the weather was sweltering. Most households had their windows open to cool off, including the 8 girls in apartment 202. Their screams could be heard clearly throughout the building, especially by the residents of Unit 4. Later, the police conducted an experiment and confirmed that a shout from the first floor could be heard by everyone in the unit. Yet, no one dared to go downstairs until the police arrived in force. Some might call this cowardice or selfishness, but put yourself in their shoes. Would you open your door in the middle of the night if you heard someone screaming murder? Chances are, you'd lock it even tighter, fearing for your own safety. To illustrate this point, let's digress briefly with another case from Tangshan, Hebei. An elderly couple in their 50s lived on the 3rd floor of an old apartment building. One night, the husband was lying awake while his wife slept soundly. He heard faint noises coming from the 4th floor above and nudged his wife awake, saying, "Honey, listen, what's that sound?" She mumbled drowsily, "What sound? Why aren't you sleeping?" But he insisted, "Can't you hear it? It's a strange noise." That noise, as it turned out, was the sound of someone prying open a door. There was a burglar on the 4th floor. Curiosity got the better of them. Against all reason, they decided to go check it out. They tiptoed out of their apartment and crept up the dark staircase, too afraid to turn on a flashlight or the lights. As they reached the landing between the 3rd and 4th floors, the 2 burglars heard them coming. Without hesitation, the thieves attacked the couple with their crowbars, beating them mercilessly. The burglars fled afterward. The husband survived but was left with permanent injuries. His wife died on the spot. This story shows why no one dared to intervene in the Shijingshan case. Self-preservation is only human. Now, back to the main case. As the Beijing Public Security Bureau's team began collecting evidence, taking photos, and examining the crime scene, let's learn more about the 8 victims. They were employees of the Beijing office of Fujian Jindelli Arts and Crafts Company. The company ran jewelry counters in major Beijing shopping malls and had recruited 20 young, beautiful, elegant girls from Fujian to sell their products. The company had rented apartment 202 in Hongda Community for 8 of these girls to live in. The victims ranged in age from 18 to 24, with an average age of 20. All were stunningly beautiful. They had arrived in Beijing after the 1999 Spring Festival, and had only been there for half a year when the tragedy struck. Earlier, we mentioned a second caller with a Beijing accent. Let's introduce her now. Her name was Li Ling, and she lived directly opposite the victims, in apartment 201 on the 2nd floor. She worked the night shift and usually got off at 8 o'clock in the morning, but on that day, she had come home at 3:30 a.m. for a personal reason that was never made public, and irrelevant to the case, so we won't dwell on it. As she walked downstairs to her building, she spotted the bloodied girl lying beside the van. She immediately pulled out her phone and called 110. While making the call, Li Ling glanced up at her apartment and noticed the lights were on. She knew her husband must be awake, so she knocked on the door instead of using her key. When her husband opened the door, she asked. "Wasn't the light on just now? Why did you turn it off?" He flipped the light switch, and Li Ling saw he was wearing only a pair of underwear, with his upper body bare. He looked surprised and said, "Aren't you supposed to be at work until morning? Why are you home so late?" Li Ling then noticed his left hand was wrapped in a cloth, with blood seeping through the bandages. She asked worriedly, "Li Yanrong, what happened to your hand? How did you hurt it this late at night?" He brushed it off, saying, "It's nothing, I accidentally cut it while tinkering with something earlier." She insisted on looking at it, but he refused, saying it wasn't serious enough for the hospital. Li Ling sighed and said, "You're so careless, hurting your hand like this in the middle of the night. Oh, by the way, do you know what happened next door?" He shook his head and asked, "No, what's wrong?" Li Ling explained, "I saw a girl lying downstairs, covered in blood. She must be from apartment 202. I called the police. They should be here soon." "Didn't you hear anything?" He replied, "No, I didn't hear a thing." Li Ling didn't press the issue. She had no idea how loud the girl's screams had been, so she assumed he really hadn't heard them. By then, the police had arrived in large numbers, and the crowd downstairs was buzzing with noise. The couple couldn't go back to sleep, so they sat up, with Zhao Yanrong smoking silently, his expression unreadable. For those listening to this story, you can probably guess what that expression meant. In fact, many neighbors already knew who the killer was when Li Ling called 110, but none of them dared to call the police themselves. It wasn't until dawn that they began making anonymous calls to 110 and the Beijing Public Security Bureau, all pointing the finger at Li Ling's husband, Zhao Yanrong. Now, let's learn more about Zhao Yanrong and how this tragedy unfolded. He was a native Beijinger, born in 1965, and a man of humble origins. He had worked as a temporary worker at a machinery factory in Shijingshan for many years. When his father retired, he begged the factory director to let his son take his place as a permanent employee. The factory was doing well, unlike most factories that closed down or laid off workers in 1996. It was still operational in 1999. Zhao Yanrong had no prior criminal record. As I often say, most murderers start small with fights, stabbings, and petty crimes before escalating to killing. But Zhao Yanrong was an exception. He was a special case with no precedent. According to those who knew him, he was a sinister man, cowardly in open conflict, but vicious and vindictive behind people's backs. For example, he hated his workshop director, who was an avid dog lover. Too afraid to confront the director directly, Zhao Yanrong decided to get revenge on his beloved pet. He bought rat poison from a local market, mixed it into meatballs, and threw them into the director's yard, poisoning his German shepherd to death. A security guard saw him do it and told the director, who was furious and demanded Zhao Yanrong be fired. But Zhao's father, a lifelong factory employee, begged the director for mercy and compensated him for the dog, so Zhao narrowly kept his job. However, his reputation was ruined, and no one wanted to associate with him. When Zhao found out the security guard had ratted him out, he took revenge on the old man too. The guard kept a bird in a cage outside the security booth, often hanging it up to sunbathe. Zhao snuck over one day and sprayed the bird with insecticide, killing it instantly. He didn't stop there. He even collected his own feces in a plastic bag and dumped it all over the security booth while the guard was away, leaving the old man to return to a stinking mess. With no evidence to prove Zhao was the culprit, the factory installed surveillance cameras in the booth. Sure enough, Zhao was caught on camera dumping feces again. This time, the factory was determined to fire him, but once more, his father and wife Li Ling begged the director for leniency, offering to compensate the guard. In the end, Xiao kept his job, but he became a complete outcast at the factory. He had no friends and lived a lonely, isolated life, a textbook example of a petty, vengeful man. According to Xiao's confession later, the motive for the crime was robbery murder. As a man living in poverty, he envied the 8 girls next door. He had seen them wearing nice clothes and jewelry, and assumed they were wealthy. He hatched a plan to rob them, and on the early morning of May 30th, 1999, at 3 a.m., he put on cotton gloves and grabbed a sharp steel knife he had forged himself at the factory, far more lethal than any ordinary switchblade or dagger. Zhao knew the layout of apartment 202 like the back of his hand, as it was identical to his own home. He climbed out of his balcony and easily jumped over to the girls' balcony. Since it was a hot night, they had left their windows wide open, and the second floor had no security grills. He wore black socks instead of shoes, and did not bother to cover his face. As soon as he jumped into the girl's bedroom, a girl sleeping by the window stirred and mumbled, "Who's there? It's so late, why aren't you sleeping?" She probably thought it was one of her roommates, but the voice startled Zhao. Without hesitation, he stabbed her 4 times in the chest. The girl screamed in pain as the first blade pierced her, waking the other 3 girls in the room. Zhao then turned and stabbed the girl sleeping on the upper bunk of the bunk bed twice, killing her instantly. One of the girls on the opposite bunk bed reacted quickly. As soon as she heard the first scream, she jumped out of bed wearing only her underwear and tried to run for the door. But before she could reach it, Zhao chased her and stabbed her in the back, killing her on the spot. The last girl in the room was petrified, huddled in a corner of her lower bunk bed. Wrapped in a towel, Xiao lunged at her and stabbed her repeatedly until she stopped moving. In a matter of seconds, all 4 girls in the southern bedroom were dead, their screams echoing through the apartment. The commotion woke the 4 girls sleeping in the northern bedroom. The oldest among them, the 24-year-old dormitory supervisor, thought her roommates were fighting. She ran over to intervene, but as soon as she pushed the door open, Zhao charged at her and stabbed her in the chest. Stunned and injured, she stumbled back into her bedroom and slammed the door shut, bracing it with her body and screaming for help. But her wound was too deep, and she couldn't hold the door for long. Zhao kicked it open with ease and stabbed her repeatedly, killing her instantly. He then turned on the girl sleeping in the nearest lower bunk bed and stabbed her to death as well. Only 2 girls were left alive now. One of them, a young woman surnamed Huang, acted quickly. While Xiao was busy stabbing the supervisor and the other girl, she sprinted to the hallway and tried to open the front door to escape. She managed to get outside, but Xiao chased after her and stabbed her once in the back, piercing her lung. Despite her horrific injury, Huang kept running, screaming for help as she stumbled down the stairs and out of the building. She only made it 2 steps before collapsing beside the van. Xiao caught up to her and slit her carotid artery, stabbing her multiple times to ensure she was dead. Huang suffered the worst injuries of all the victims. Back in the apartment, only 1 girl remained alive, the same one who had made the first 110 call. She was too terrified to run outside, knowing she would run straight into Zhao on his way back. But she made a fatal mistake. Instead of locking the front door to keep him out, she took out her phone and called 110. As she was on the line, Zhao returned from killing Huang. He found her and stabbed her repeatedly in the face and chest until she died. Zhao then went back to the 7 girls lying in the apartment, unsure if they were truly dead. He proceeded to stab each of them multiple times in a frenzy. By the end, the 8 victims had suffered a total of over 120 stab wounds, with an average of more than a dozen each. After the brutal killings, Xiao did not leave through the front door. Instead, he climbed back over the balcony, his original entry point, and returned to his own apartment. On his way out, he grabbed a wallet from one of the girl's bags, which contained only a few dozen yuan. What's shocking is that he completely missed a drawer in the hallway desk that held 80,000 yuan in cash and a Nokia 8810 mobile phone, a luxury item worth 15,000 yuan in 1999, with a stainless steel sliding cover. But Xiao was in such a panic that he had no time to search for valuables. His only thought was to escape. He had barely been home for 5 minutes when Li Ling walked in. In his haste, he had stripped off his blood-stained clothes and pants, stuffing them under the bed. His socks were soaked in blood from stepping on the girl's blood, but he didn't have time to change them, so he put on his leather shoes over the bloody socks, planning to change them later. Now, let's think about the layout of Building 4. In most residential complexes, buildings are arranged facing each other, whether north or south. There would have been other buildings nearby. When Zhao chased Huang out of the building, he was seen by neighbors watching from the windows of the opposite buildings. Similarly, when he climbed back over the balcony to his own apartment, residents in the nearby buildings would have witnessed his escape. Even residents on the 3rd, 4th, 5th, and 6th floors of his own unit would have seen him fleeing the scene. In short, Zhao Yanrong's actions were witnessed by many people that night. The case was solved quickly. Xiao was arrested before dawn on May 30th. Since it was a Sunday, the police asked the residents of Unit 4 to cooperate with the investigation by providing statements and clues. Naturally, they started with Zhao Yanrong's family, since Li Ling had made the emergency call. When the police asked Xiao if he had heard the girl screaming, he claimed he had been asleep and heard nothing, a blatant lie, since everyone in the building had heard the commotion. The police also noticed his bandaged hand, which was still bleeding. But even without these clues, Xiao was doomed. In his panic, he had accidentally cut his left thumb with his own knife during the attack, leaving a trail of his blood at the crime scene. DNA testing later confirmed the blood belonged to him. The police also found the murder weapon hidden in the kitchen drain of his apartment, along with the shredded cotton gloves he had used. The blood-stained clothes and pants he had stuffed under the bed were also discovered as evidence. When he was arrested, he was still wearing the leather shoes over the bloody socks. According to Zhao's confession, he had only intended to rob the girls. But this motive is highly questionable. The 8 girls knew him, they were neighbors, living door to door. If his goal was robbery, why did he decide to kill all of them? It makes no sense. If he hadn't planned to kill them, how could he have robbed them without being recognized? Similarly, if he had only wanted to steal, why not do it during the day when the girls were at work? Breaking into their apartment at 3 a.m., when they were all asleep, was an enormous risk, especially since he didn't even wear a mask to hide his face. Did he really think the girls wouldn't wake up, or wouldn't recognize him if they did? It's a mystery. Some people have speculated that Xiao held a grudge against the girls, but Li Ling testified that there was no bad blood between them, they were just polite neighbors who exchanged greetings occasionally. The girls were quiet and never disturbed his family. Others have suggested that Xiao resented them for being outsiders who came to Beijing and took his jobs, but this theory is also far-fetched. The truth is, Zhao Yanrong's motives remain a source of confusion and speculation to this day, leaving many unanswered questions. Some people have speculated that Xiao held a grudge against the girls, but Li Ling testified that there was no bad blood between them, they were just polite neighbors who exchanged greetings occasionally. The girls were quiet and never disturbed his family. Others have suggested that Xiao resented them for being outsiders who came to Beijing and took his jobs, but this theory is also far-fetched. The truth is, Zhao Lianrong's motives remain a source of confusion and speculation to this day, leaving many unanswered questions. What is certain is that this case caused a national uproar, and the authorities acted swiftly. From his arrest on May 30th to his execution on June 30th, the entire process took only 1 month. Justice was served, but it could never bring back the 8 young lives that were so cruelly taken that night.